I have survived 10 years on the oldest Anarchy server in Minecraft, one of the most chaotic places on the entire internet, so I'm going on a journey today. When I joined the server 10 years ago, I took pictures of different locations that helped me survive during my first few months. Well, I'm retracing my steps and going back to these places to see how much they've changed after an entire decade. I've picked over 10 different locations that I want to directly compare with my old screenshots. Most of these places are unknown to the public. I'm curious to see if any of them have survived, especially one of the last locations on the list, which is an old base of mine that I abandoned 10 years ago. I haven't seen it since, so I'm really curious to see what's become of it. So let's get right into this journey today. We'll be traveling through the server's northeast quadrant, as all 10 locations are found here. The farthest is hundreds of thousands of blocks away, so it'll be quite the walk in some places. My trip started in the same place it began 10 years ago, 2B2T spawn region, except this time I wasn't surviving on zombie flesh. Now, when I first escaped, this is what it looked like. While it was already quite chaotic, it wasn't nearly as destroyed like it is today. Even in my screenshots, you could still see areas that were somewhat normal, but now a large portion of the natural blocks have been destroyed. This region is almost like a strange organism in that it is constantly changing and evolving based on player actions. But after taking in the sights, I made my way to the next stop, my original bunker. Before creating my first base, I built an underground survival bunker that I used to grow food and resources while also keeping myself hidden from players. It was pretty bare bones, but it had everything you would need for surviving near spawn. Once in a while, I would invite other players to use the bunker before they set out on their own journeys, which, looking back, was probably not the smartest thing in the world, but still. I would often frequent this place up until at least 2016. But upon arriving at the coordinates, as expected, it had taken some damage. Comparing it to my original picture, the overall shape of the bunker was unchanged, but the resources were long gone. Some signs indicated that others may have tried to revive it at some point, but 10 years later, it was finally destroyed. Even the trees on the surface had all gone missing in the past decade, either through griefing or curious new players. Since this was so close to spawn, I figured this would be the case, and after taking a look around, I headed off towards the next location, the Sandstone Base. Early in my travels, I came across the exposed entrance of an underground base that was much fancier than mine. It didn't even have a name, so I just wrote it down as Sandstone Base in my coordinate list because of the block's use on parts of the walls. This intact base was a hint that there was more to this Anarchy server than met the eye. But upon returning to the original entrance 10 years later, the place was blown to smithereens, completely wrecked. Compared to my original pictures, almost nothing remained. One or two floating sandstone blocks were the only clue of what this had once been. But again, being so close to spawn, this was not a surprise. After taking a final look around, I headed out towards the next destination, the abandoned Desert Palace. In my early travels, I came across a large desert palace that didn't seem to have a name at the time. It was not very far from spawn, which is why I was surprised it was in such good shape, even back then. I did return to it once 7 years ago to document the place on film, but I haven't been back to it since. Well, upon arriving, as expected, the entire base was flattened. While there were still pieces of sandstone around, crops, cacti, and major buildings were completely gone. Looking at my picture from 10 years ago, very little remained the same. It was no different than the thousands of craters that littered the spawn region. It's a good reminder that nothing on Anarchy servers truly lasts forever. After taking a final look around, I made my way to the next stop, Stonetown. In my early travels, I discovered a small player-built town where the roads and buildings were both made of stone. It was likely built in either 2011 or 2012, meaning that when I originally found it, it was still a relatively young base. There was nothing too extravagant about this place, but it was a comfy rest stop for travelers. Well, upon returning, I found that the town had not survived. The majority of the buildings had been griefed, but some original blocks still remained. If it weren't for the flowers in the background of my original picture, it would have been harder to line up the exact shot, but the town had seen much better days. So far, every location had been like this, but I had confidence that as we got farther from spawn, our luck would change. So I moved on to the next location, the abandoned lookout. 10 years ago, during a rainy evening with a lot of monster activity, I took shelter in a hilltop lookout base that had already been griefed. I ended up staying here for a few days since the base still had a functional Skeleton XP farm. It was here I created my first ever Power 5 bow. I had a lot of fond memories of this place, so I was absolutely delighted to see it was almost unchanged in over 10 years. How funny is it that the base that was already in ruins was the best looking one so far? The place clearly had seen plenty of travelers in the last decade, but everything was just like I remembered it. The skeleton spawner was long gone, but the actual structure of the base remained unchanged. I was glad to see it had survived, and it gave me hope that other locations on the list might be okay as well. So I continued forward. Next on the list, the Advanced Jungle Temple. One of the first jungle builds I encountered was a strange temple high up in the trees. When I found it, it had some minor lava damage but was mostly intact. To get between the structures, you had to parkour on some floating platforms, which I thought was a neat idea. Jungles are one of my least favorite biomes to navigate, but I managed to make my way to the coordinates. The structures were still there, so I quickly got into position to compare the photos. 10 years later, the build had seen plenty of activity, but was still looking good. A lot of player-made towers and bridges had been made in the area. I wouldn't be surprised if some repairs had been made here and there over the years, but overall, I was impressed with how it withstood the test of time. My mood was beginning to improve, but that would change quickly at our next stop, Brick Island. This is the only picture I have of a place that I nicknamed Brick Island because of the small brick house that was built on it. Despite the small house, there was a huge mine shaft next to it that went all the way down to bedrock. Well, upon arriving, it was gone. The house had been completely destroyed, but the mine shaft remained. As I went down to take a look around, I actually found a shulker box with TNT in it, as well as some other valuables. Was it the Griefer? Or perhaps some unknown explorer? Who knows, but it was important that I see this place because it was an inspiration for my own island base, which would be stop number 9 for us. My ocean outpost. I started my own small ocean base after traveling well over 100,000 blocks in the overworld, which 10 years ago I thought was a massive distance, especially on foot. It wasn't anything too crazy, but it was a comfy little base. The sign out front read Research Station Number 4. The truth is, this was the only one, but the number 4 was intended to get potential griefers to go on a wild goose chase looking for the others when they didn't actually exist. It was a fun little prank. But since I didn't really have any valuables here, once I left this place to head back to spawn, I never came back. So I was very curious to see if it had survived. Well, as I approached the island, to my complete shock, my base was still there, practically untouched. It looked just how I remembered it. Compared to my original picture, it was nearly identical. Even my boat was in the exact same place, despite having changed to the more modern variant. Signs had been left behind by travelers who had taken some of the supplies I left there. I was stunned. Even my bedroom and rooftop garden were still there. It was like looking into a window of my own past. I could now say one of my bases had survived over 10 years on Tubi2T. While it filled me with joy, I accepted that showing it on camera like this would likely spell the end for it at some point. Maybe that's why I waited so long to return. But after grabbing my boat as a souvenir, it was time to head back near spawn to go to the final location, 700 Base. 700 Base was a well-known spawn base that was founded in 2013 and helped many new players survive. Surprisingly, I didn't actually find it until after I had already been surviving for a few months. When I did find it, it was already partially griefed. It was here that I met a player named James Russells for the first time. He had been repairing some of the grief damage. Him and I would become friends and eventual basemates. Now, the base was called 700 Base because it was only 700 blocks away from spawn. I want you to take a guess. What do you think it looks like now? Well, behold, unrecognizable. The damage has gotten so bad that I couldn't even identify any of the original blocks underneath the lava casts. There's griefing, and then there's being erased from existence. This one definitely takes the cake for the most destroyed out of all of them we've seen today. But I had roughly retraced my journey from 10 years ago, and with the server soon updating to the modern version of Minecraft, I foresee even more adventures to come.